And tonight we're talking about, the message's name is He is for us. And we heard a message last week, and we heard a message last week from that Dan Duvall was speaking, and at one point he ends up talking briefly about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and when he was talking about that, I just felt like God was telling me, "Hey, look at the furnace," and I was like, "Okay." And so there's one or two things I looked at, maybe or maybe not, no one knows necessarily, but during the message last week that I was looking at, and God spoke to me about a couple things, and He was like, "I want you to end up talking about this." So that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. That's what we were talking about tonight, not kind of. And so the story, we're going to start in Daniel 2, but we're going to be focusing on Daniel 3, but really to give more of a background, we're going to start in Daniel 2. And majority of this is all English Standard Version. But Daniel 2, 46 through 49, what's happened in this chapter is Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the kingdom of the world at the time, that this is like the biggest kingdom in the world. This is the most powerful kind of one in the world. And so King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he goes, and Daniel ends up interpreting this dream. And the dream is the one about a statue. And the point of the dream is that, hey, there's these kingdoms, there's this statue there's this idol, and these kingdoms make up this idol, and then this stone, Jesus, destroys the idol, and it falls down, etc., etc. But what I want to focus on is the point of the story is that this idol is not good. That this idol is not good. Mm-hmm. Is what I want to focus on. And so the point of the dream is, hey, this idol is not the best of the best. This is not the perfect, plan of God. In fact, it's destroyed by God. And so Daniel ends up giving this interpretation of what this dream is about this idol. And then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, and he paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered to Daniel. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many gifts, and he made him rule over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. So Daniel had his boys back, kind of said, "Hey, we're going to get you the hookup." But what's interesting here is King Nebuchadnezzar. He's this king of Babylon, and Babylon has all these different gods. Is polytheistic, like majority of these civilizations at this time, and so that's why Nebuchadnezzar is saying, "Hey, your God is the God of gods," because he has all these other gods, but he's admitting, and he's having this revelation, or maybe understanding is a better point. Maybe understanding right now, not necessarily revelation just yet. But he has this understanding that Yahweh is the God of gods, that he's amazing. And so anyway, so King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Daniel tells him, hey, this idol is bad and going to be destroyed, etc., etc. So now we're going to go into Daniel 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. So he literally just had this dream. And Daniel just said, hey, this like giant idol thing in your dream, this is like bad. It's not like the perfect will of God kind of thing. And so King Nebuchadnezzar goes, yeah, I see what you're doing. Yeah, I ought to build like a big old me. I ought to build a big me somewhere. And so King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits. 60 cubits roughly translates into 90 feet tall. It's 90 feet tall.
That's big.
This is very, very high. This house to the soffit is probably 20 something. Yeah. And so it's a lot bigger than my house. And its breadth is 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps and the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officers of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered for the dedication of the image of the king of King Nebuchadnezzar that he had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed out loud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately cast into the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people hear the sound of the as soon as all the peoples heard, the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, language, they fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans or Babylonians, came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you are ready to hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Okay, well, I'm just going to stop there for just a second. But what I want to say here is, so these guys come to King Nebuchadnezzar and they say, hey, there's these guys, they don't worship this image. And Nebuchadnezzar goes, oh, bring them to me then. And so then they come and they're before Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, we're going to play all these musical deals and all kinds of music or whatever, and I'm going to expect you to bow down before this deal, this 90-foot deal, and worship this image of me and worship my gods. It doesn't say here that they are in a construction site. I just want to point that out. They're in front of a 90-foot, I think it's roughly 10 feet wide structure that's made out of gold. Also, I'm going to point out that this is Babylon. This is not some shanty town. Babylon, we like to think that we're way more intelligent than older civilizations. We have more knowledge, but we're not necessarily more intelligent. Yeah. And maybe I could even argue we have different knowledge. Maybe not even more. Yeah. But this Babylon is not like what we imagine, like a bunch of Bedouin tents in the desert kind of thing. This is a city. This is a culture. This thing, it literally houses one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Babylonian Hanging Gardens. Like, they don't know how they did it. It's so advanced. It's beautiful in a way that it's talked about mythologically. It's so amazing. Like, this place is amazing. It's not crappy. It's cultivated. It's thought out. It's not random. So this statue was not Nebuchadnezzar going, hey, build a statue wherever you want. This thing is cultivated. It's landscaped, right? This is thought out. It's not ridiculous. They're not in the middle of a construction site with a gigantic thing. That makes no sense. That makes no sense.
It had gates that looked like those in Jerusalem, except they would be about 5 or 6 times bigger.
Yeah, this place is insane. It's insane. It's literally like, I mean, it's, you just have to look up the 7 wonders of the ancient world and you'll figure out what this thing is. Like, Babylon is this place that is
very advanced.
Is super advanced. Yeah, it's amazing. And this is where they are. And I say that because what we think of and what we see in Bible stories doesn't paint the correct picture to me. Okay, so
Not a million people.
Say what?
Not a million people.
Yeah, this is like a culture of people. This is not like a little, oh, look, I think we've stumbled across Babylon. Let's see. So verse 15, it says, but if you do not worship, Nebuchadnezzar says, but if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Now, what else is interesting here is what God could deliver you out of my hands. There is a certain view Nebuchadnezzar has, not only of who Yahweh is, but of who he is. That's important to remember. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Now, what I want to say here is now there's a period. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And what I want to say here is the Senate structure is important. And the Senate structure is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego tell King Nebuchadnezzar, they say, if you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God is able to deliver us. And they go on and say, and he will deliver us out of your hand. He will get us out of this. But if you do not throw us into the fiery furnace, we're not bowing down. We're not going to worship. So he's not saying, but if our God does not deliver us, that's not what they're saying. The sentence structure that's not the way it's set up. Also, it doesn't make a ton of sense because they literally just said he will deliver us. So then if they went on and went, but if he doesn't, it's like, well, then why'd you say, but he will? Anyway, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army, we're not going to go into that, but that is interesting, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men were bound in their cloaks and their tunics and their hats and their other garments, and were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the fiery furnace. And am I gonna talk yet? No. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps and the prefects, the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except for their own God. Therefore I make a decree: any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruin, and there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And so when we were listening to this story last week, the furnace was highlighted. Holy Spirit just kind of was like, "Hey, look at the furnace." And I was like, it is odd, isn't it? It is odd that there is a furnace, some crappy furnace, a furnace, just sitting in the middle of this place. You have this cultivated like garden with this enormous statue that literally this area is designed that anytime you hear music, you're supposed to worship this idol and the gods. And there's a furnace just sitting over here. That doesn't make a ton of sense. That's a little strange. I probably, if I was Nebuchadnezzar, would be like, "Hey, you know what? I think I'll probably have the construction site cleaned up and moved off of my holy area that I've set up for worship of our gods." I probably would do that. Unless the furnace is designed for a purpose that is what we're talking about. And what's really interesting here is there's a couple tells in it that are interesting, is the way I'll put it. And what it says is that Nebuchadnezzar's filled with fury, and he ends up ordering the furnace to be 7 times heated more than it usually is heated. He ordered some of his mighty men to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them in the furnace. These men are bound in cloaks and tunics, and then they're thrown in the furnace. It doesn't talk about we travel to the furnace. It doesn't talk about any of that. It sounds like it's right there. It says, because the king's order was urgent and the furnace is overheated, the flame of fire killed those men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then it says, and these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace. They fell into it. So what this ends up telling us is the way this thing is designed is you're being top loaded. You're being loaded from the top. So the only way to be loaded from the top is this some sort of hole that's big enough for three men to go through. This is an odd thing. This is not a chimney. A chimney is not big enough for three men to go through, right? And also that it talks about that these men end up dying because it was urgent and the furnace is overheated. That typically these people would not die, is what this is telling me. That they're telling me it is strange these people died, and they died because this is urgent and it was overheated. Not because they walked on top of it and threw people down the blowhole, right? Which would make me go, oh, that's why they died. They shouldn't be up there. They shouldn't be doing that. But they should be doing that because that's what this is for.
There's a ramp and a big opening like a fireplace in the front. We walked up the ramp.
Yeah, and then it goes on and it says, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose in haste. So not only is he astonished by something, he rises up, meaning he is not risen. He is not standing. He is sitting. He's sitting with a view angle of this furnace. Typically, and I'll go ahead and give you a little teaser, is if you look up what this furnace is for, you're going to find a lot of literature that talks about brick kilns, which is true, that brick kilns did exist. In fact, this statue that we're talking about had a base that was made out of, I forgot it now, but I can't remember. Millions of bricks, I'll put it that way. And literally archaeologists have found bricks that would be like, yeah, there's a million bricks here. This is a ton of bricks. So they kiln bricks. This is not strange or anything. But I don't know why there'd be a seating area in front of a kiln, because firing bricks can only be so interesting, right? That's not a spectator sport. Watching people burn, because earlier in the thing it says that the decree is anyone that does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the fiery furnace. Well, how would you do that? Just kill them. There's a million ways to kill people. Charging a furnace up, getting it hot enough, this enormous thing, this is not an efficient way to kill people. This is something else. This is a different reason to do this. It's not just to kill people. There is a different reason to do this. And there is a spectacle of it, right? That we see that Nebuchadnezzar rises up in haste. He goes and this hole in this kiln is big enough, this furnace is big enough that he can see 4 men walking around. So this opening is large enough to give multiple spectators a view inside to what's happening. You don't want a big door on a kiln that fires bricks. You want a small door because you don't want heat to come out. And so there's a lot of things that don't make sense with this kiln unless it's designed for kilning people.
Yes.
They killed people all over the place.
Well, he said, the rest of them were going to be drawn and quartered.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So he ends up saying a different method to kill people. Right. That, hey, you know what? If you disrespect this God Yahweh, then you're going to be you're going to be pulled apart. So it's not like that's their favorite way to do it. It's for a reason. Now, to me, if you're in this court of gods and idols, burning stuff in the back sounds a little different. It sounds more like now we're talking about sacrifices. We're not talking about brick kilns. And so what's interesting is if you don't just take Sunday morning Bible lesson 101 first at face value, the first one that pops up on Google, because they don't want to talk about the actual reasoning that this happened all the time. Even though literally the Bible tells you that, hey, you know what, anyone that disrespects these gods, this is what's happening. So it tells you this happens all the time. But we're going to just talk about Marduk for a second. And Marduk is the god of Babylon. He is the high god of Babylon. And there's a bunch of different gods. Marduk is like the top of the top, though, in Babylon. And what's interesting, and I'm literally just going to tell you things that are sort of interesting. We're not going into it, but it is interesting. Typically, Marduk, the god of Babylon, he is typically depicted with a dragon. It's like a dragon chimera thing because it's kind of like a snake, kind of like a dragon. I wish that had any meaning. Dragon, snakes. Seems like there's some sort of connection. I can't think of it right now. But the other thing that's really interesting is Marduk is also a storm god. And we know that Baal is also a storm god. We know that Zeus and Jupiter are also storm gods. This is very interesting. What else is interesting is that there is this prophecy. This is not a Christian prophecy, heads up. But it says Marduk prophesied that he would return to Babylon one day under a new messianic king who would bring salvation to the city and seek revenge on the Elamites. This king would be Nebuchadnezzar. And it goes on and it says, the work is clearly propaganda because Nebuchadnezzar defeated these people. But what's important here is it says that Marduk prophesied that he would return to Babylon one day as this king. This king is Nebuchadnezzar. That there is this belief in this time that Nebuchadnezzar embodies Marduk, that he is the embodiment of Marduk. That's why there is a statue of Nebuchadnezzar, because you are not worshiping Nebuchadnezzar, you're worshiping Marduk, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Does that make sense? And what's interesting here, and I just want to say this is interesting, I'm just going to say it's interesting, is so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, hey, we're not bowing down. We're not going to bow down. It doesn't matter if you throw us in the furnace. We're not going to bow down. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed. This is a very strange thing to say. Like, he's filled with fury. Okay. What was he? Was he grinning before? Was he, what's he do? What does this even mean that his face has changed? Well, I'm going to propose, I'll just propose this, that there is something in King Nebuchadnezzar, that he's not just a man. There is something that does embody him. Now, yeah, that's right. That there is some sort of spirit that is in him. And when it talks about his face changes, it does change. Now, what it changes to, I don't know. If his eyes go black, I don't know. But I imagine something is happening. And because they just brought up, hey, we're not bowing to you, God. We're going to stand with Yahweh. The problem with this is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not on Yahweh's property. They are in Marduk's property. So Marduk has an authority in this area. This spirit has an authority. I mean, he's in the king, so he has some sort of authority. And so this infuriates this spirit. Now we're going to go on and look at something else, but I believe that Yahweh is speaking to the man Nebuchadnezzar in all these moments, because that's the God we serve. That he is a God of grace, and he is a God of love, and he's a God of redemption. And anyway, so but again, Babylon is this incredible kingdom. So that's kind of why I end up kind of proposing that this furnace is not for this. And literally that's just what the Holy Spirit said on my heart, is that this furnace was not for this. And I was like, you know what? Good enough for me. God, is that what you're saying? Then I believe you. But then God showed me this. He showed me that in 605 BC, there's this tablet from 605 BC, and it's a Akkadian tablet, which is Babylon again. It's part of Babylon. But on this tablet, it reads. This is obviously a translation. I'm not gonna. But it says, concerning all the cult centers of the land of Akkad, and that's northwest Babylon. I have heard reports that temple officials and priests of the cultures of the cult centers have taken to falsehood, committed an abomination, been stained with blood, spoken lies. Inwardly they profane and desecrate their gods, little g gods. They prattle and cohort about things that the great Lord Marduk, supreme king of the gods, prince of his brothers, created gods and mankind and allotted them their destiny, did not command, they established for their gods. Now, you king's officials, in the presence of your great divinity, on the account of evil behavior and the abomination of gods, destroy them, burn them, roast them in the kiln, and make their smoke billow, bring about their fiery end with the fiery flame of the box thorn. And this plaque is found on a kiln. And they discovered this. And it literally like solidified, oh, it wasn't for bricks. It was for roasted people. And anyway, made me super excited. Sad for them, obviously. But I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so what this ends up saying, and now we're going to go back to the story, is in the face of this moment where these three guys are not talking to just anyone. They're talking to the most powerful person on the earth at the time, in the most powerful kingdom on the earth at the time. And they end up saying, to them, hey, if you don't throw us in, if you say you won't throw us in, we're not gonna bow down to this, and we're not gonna serve your gods. That's not what we're gonna do. And our God's gonna take care of us. And in this moment, they're grabbed and bound and all this kind of stuff, and it's such a show, it's such a show, because Nebuchadnezzar has now, he's furious, so he's extraordinarily animated and powerful, right? And he goes and he says, heat the ovens up. It's like 7 times, right? 7 times the normal heat, and there's flames billowing out of this thing. Like it looks like the mouth of hell or something. And this is to honor his gods and to honor him, right? And so he takes Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and the guys, the biggest guys, the strongest men, the best of the best, et cetera, of Babylon, take these 3 guys and they throw them in. But just throwing them in kills them. Like, these guys die, and they're the strongest, biggest, best guys in Babylon, and they are dead because of just being near this. And they fall in, and Nebuchadnezzar looks in this sacrificial furnace, this thing that should have smoke going up to the evil gods of this land. And he sees not 3, but 4 people. And the God we serve will cover you to such an extent that he doesn't respect the sacrifices to evil gods. Our God will show up in the middle of a sacrificial cult organizational like spectacle.
Sacrifice.
Yeah. He will show up in the middle, literally in the middle of it, and say, no, they're protected. They got themselves here because they love me, and they're protected. I'm going to get them out of here. And they're not going to be touched. Was it uncomfortable? Nah, maybe. Right? Was it tough to make these decisions? Yeah, it was tough, But they did, and they got there, and God says, no, I'm going to honor this, and I'm going to get them through this. And they get them out, and there's not even the smell of smoke on them, which is remarkable and amazing. And so Daniel, before this, has told this dream to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar's like, oh man, that's so cool. I mean, the God you serve is just a revealer of mysteries. That's so neat. That's so cool. How neat. Anyway, I'm going to go make me this altar and this idol. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego start speaking of Yahweh. And Nebuchadnezzar goes, your God is the God of gods. Your God is the Lord of lords. He's amazing. No God could save you from this except for this God. That's amazing. And he goes, anyone that speaks about this God in a poor way is going to be killed. And this is the culture he knows, right? So Nebuchadnezzar acts this way. Well, anyway, but you see these little moments where God's saying something to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's revealing himself to Nebuchadnezzar, and he's not part of the allotment. He's not Yahweh's. He's not under Yahweh at this point. And but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, had they had the New Testament, they would have quoted Romans 8:28 through 31, and they would have said, and we know all things work together for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose, for whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, he also justified. And whom he justified, he also glorified. That God doesn't, 31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And that's the verse they would have quoted to Nebuchadnezzar. But they didn't have it yet. But again, it's if God be for us, who can be against us? And so we've read Daniel 2, we've seen chapter 2, we've seen chapter 3, and now we're going to read chapter 4, and we're going to jump down to the end of chapter 4. And so what ends up happening is Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, and he says this dream, and Daniel says, man, this dream is not a good one, bud. I'm sorry. I hope this is for your enemies, because if it's for you, that's a bad deal. And then it says, this is verse 29, it says, at the end of 12 months, Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king answered and said, is not this great Babylon, which I built by my mighty power, as royal residence for the glory of my majesty? While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and you shall be dwelling with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men, and he ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew as long as eagle feathers. Okay. And his nails grew like bird claws. And right here, I want to just again propose that this was not him losing his mind.
This is a whole nother.
But this is something demonic.
He's
That he is going out, and there is some sort of demonic thing. And I mean, he literally is showing, and we see these prophecies, that these are not biblical prophecies. You know, these are from his culture, but they're saying, hey, this entity dwells inside of this king. And so there is some sort of entity in him. And in this moment, this entity, I believe, gains control. And I'll tell you why. Because, one, I imagine this entity is directed to do such by Yahweh. That this entity, just like Satan goes and he says, hey, can I mess around with Job? And God says, okay, just don't do this. That this entity says, hey, Lord, I have authority here. Yahweh, I have authority. This is my area. Can I end up kind of messing with him? And God's like, yeah, when I say go, you do your deal until I say stop. And he's like, okay. And so he acts like an animal for this period of time. And then verse 34 says, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And so at that moment, he was released. He has this release all of a sudden. And I look up to heaven, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and I honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth. And none can say his hand, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. For I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble.
It's crazy.
And literally one of the most evil people in the entire world, prideful, literally possessed by something. God said, nah, I want him. I'm going to get him. And the spirit realm said, Yahweh, that is not your lot. That's Babylon. And Yahweh said, I am. And they said, okay. And in this moment, God, this is a hard God flex in this moment. And the next story is they fall back into Nebuchadnezzar isn't king anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Nebuchadnezzar, one day, we're going to get to heaven. And we're going to walk in there, and we're going to be like, who is that dude? And they're going to be like, that's like Nebuchadnezzar. And we're going to be like, from Babylon? Like the Marduk guy? And they're going to be like, that's him. And The thing is that, again, we know that all things work together for the good to those who love God. And there's reasons why things happen. There's reasons why we go through things. There's reasons why we feel like we're in a furnace. And sometimes it's for us, right? Sometimes God says, hey, you know what? I need to burn a couple of things off of you that aren't supposed to be part of you. And so we go through these places and these hard areas, these difficult places, but we come out on the other side and we don't even smell like smoke, right? But sometimes that's for someone else. That it's our testimony in that, and it's God showing up in a way that's a light in us that they go, oh, that's crazy. How did that happen? You went through the furnace, but you came out not even smelling like smoke. How? Because I've seen the furnace and I've been in the furnace, and it always hurts and it always kills and it always destroys, but you came out and you made it okay. It doesn't even look like it messed with you. How? Who was with you in the furnace? And then you can go, oh, well, that was the Son of God. And that testimony can plant a seed. And maybe it doesn't do what you think it ought to do, right? They typically don't. And because God likes to confound the wise with the simple things and that kind of deal. But it does plant a seed, or it waters a seed. And then at some point, God shows up and says, no, we're not doing this anymore. I want you to know that I'm the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And in that moment, in this story, Nebuchadnezzar remembers back and he says, man, Daniel was the only one that had this revelation. And he kept saying, it wasn't me, but it was Yahweh. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't scared of me. Everyone's scared of me, but they weren't. And they weren't scared of the furnace, and they weren't hurt in the furnace. And they said, well, it wasn't us, it was Yahweh. And now Yahweh has said that I'm humbled, and this happened to me, and now I come out of it and I say, oh man, no, you are the Lord of Lords. And Nebuchadnezzar has this crazy change. It's just real weird, honestly. I mean, he literally just keeps talking about killing people. He just keeps talking about killing people because they're not worshiping the gods he wants, so he's going to kill them. This is an evil person. We call him evil. And God says, yeah, but I'll make him one of my kids. I can redeem him. He's that good. And he lets us go through things, and he gets us through things. And it's for us, but it's also for others. And so no matter how fiery the furnace is, right? If it's normal heat, if it's 7 times, if it's killing everybody around it, it's okay. Just hang out with God. Just say, you know what, Lord, let's get through the furnace today, right? That we go through these places, these hot places, these fiery places in our lives, and God says, just walk with me. Just stay with me, and your hair won't even smell like smoke. I'll redeem it. I'll redeem it. And I'll redeem it into something that is impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible to come out from that not smell like smoke. It's impossible for Nebuchadnezzar to be redeemed. That's impossible. And God says, nothing is impossible. And that's so good.
Yeah.
So good, so fun. And so with that, I encourage you, when you read your Bible stories, even if it's in a picture book, that you go, why? If something ever jumps out and you go, that's kind of weird. That's an odd thing. Just go, why does that sit odd with me? And the Holy Spirit's going, well, you know what? I hide things for kings to go discover. That I love y'all finding out things. That's just the God that we serve, is he loves discovery. He loves it. The church would tell you different. The church would say, read the projector. Those are the only Bible verses I want you to read. And listen to my words. And then clock out at the end of Sunday at 12 sharp. And then do not worry about anything else. unless you're a real Christian, and then come on Wednesday night and we'll play games. But anyway, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true for all churches. But when you're reading, just if you feel like questioning something, then question and go, why? And then go research it and figure it out. Anyway, that is the end